It was undoubtedly incredible how much Goku's life had changed in the last year. Everything happened very fast. First, after living his entire life on Earth, he discovered that he was an alien, specifically a Saiyan. Without a doubt, that revelation was shocking, but not as pleasant as one might expect for someone who had just learned of his origins, since the first impression he got of his race through his brother Raditz was hardly the best. Later on, that same bad impression would be reinforced by the horrible acts of cruelty displayed by Nappa and Vegeta, with many of his friends having died before he could return from his training with King Kai to save whoever was left alive, which wasn't many. Although by that point he had accepted and even appreciated the huge genetic advantages that his race's biology offered for becoming much stronger, especially realizing it during his roughly 6-day journey to Planet Namek, where his power grew more in those 6 days than it had in the first 25 years of his life. All that didn't change the fact that the hatred, resentment, and disgust he felt toward his race was immense, seeing the cruelty that Raditz, Nappa, and Vegeta were capable of. If even Raditz, who was his own blood, could be that cruel and evil, he couldn't imagine how the rest of his race might be, much less his parents. And although Goku was pure of heart, not wishing death or destruction on anyone, he couldn't help thinking that, deep down, if most of the Saiyans had died, maybe it was for the best for the rest of the universe's inhabitants. Who knew how he would have turned out if he hadn't hit his head as a child? His perception and understanding of the Saiyans would have remained that way if not for an incredible and unexpected moment that took place after he arrived on Planet Namek, fought with Ginyu, lost his body, got it back, and then healed from his injuries as a result. That moment in question happened when he reached the place where his friends, Son, and Vegeta were fighting against Frieza, with the latter having utterly defeated and shattered Vegeta inside after the terrible beating he'd given him before Goku arrived. Vegeta, in his final moments, opened up to Goku in a way he never thought a cold and cruel man like Vegeta could, telling him all his trauma with Frieza, his story, his suffering, the sorrow he felt for losing what was rightfully his planet, his race, his people, his father. All that they lost, all that he lost as the Saiyan Prince. He explained it was all Frieza's fault, who had humiliated him, destroyed him, and broken his pride as a warrior. And because of everything he'd suffered, even though they were enemies, Vegeta, in his last breath of desperation, begged Kakarot to avenge him, his race, and his people by finally defeating Frieza, and by becoming the Super Saiyan his race needed to end that cycle of humiliation and torture under the domination of the terrible Emperor. After that audacious request to someone who was theoretically his enemy, Vegeta finally drew his last breath, succumbing to the wounds inflicted by Frieza's torture. For some reason he couldn't quite explain in words, Goku felt deeply moved by Vegeta's words, far more affected by his death than he would have expected. Not really by Vegeta the individual, after all he was a horrible person, but by what he represented, the symbolism that now, as far as Goku knew, he was the last pure Saiyan alive in the entire universe. As a final act of respect, from one warrior to another, Goku buried Vegeta, dedicating a few final words in understanding of the suffering he bore, and later swearing to Frieza that in the name of all the races he had harmed, in the name of all the Namekians he had killed, and even in the name of all the Saiyans whose chance at changing and becoming better he had taken away, he, Goku, also known as Kakarot, a Saiyan raised on Earth, swore he would defeat Frieza. Everyone there was surprised by Goku's words, especially hearing him accept his Saiyan name. It was astonishing that he referred to himself as Kakarot. At that moment, Frieza recognized that face, the face of a warrior unafraid of death, determined to see his fight through to victory no matter what, recalling that Saiyan who resisted him and fought to the end before he destroyed Planet Vegeta. And the Emperor realized that Saiyan was surely the father of this Goku standing before him. From there, the legendary fight between Goku and Frieza unfolded exactly the same as in the original story, without the slightest change, even after Goku attained the legendary Super Saiyan form. However, when Goku was about to introduce himself in an imposing and proud manner to a terrified Frieza, instead of saying, "I am the Super Saiyan Son Goku," he said, "I am the Super Saiyan Goku and Kakarot." After his epic battle against the Emperor, which Goku won, believing the tyrant to be dead after his incompetence and continuing to fight even after losing half his body, Goku managed to escape Planet Namek's explosion by boarding a Ginyu Force space pod he had found. But the margin for him to get in that special pod and power it up to escape the planet was very tight, so tight that the craft almost veered off course after being hit by the planet's explosion as it fled into space. Because of that, for a few moments, due to the explosion's blast, the pod became unstable and started shaking violently in all directions, with a helpless and exhausted Goku suffering severe motion sickness from all that shaking inside the capsule. Until, in a careless moment, he hit his head, adding to the extreme fatigue and injuries he'd already suffered. In the end, that caused him to pass out from exhaustion and the pain in his head from striking the inner shell of the capsule he was riding in. During his journey to Planet Yardrat, while he lay in a coma, Goku dreamed of something. Or rather, it felt like a memory, a blurred and confusing memory that gradually turned into several memories. These were memories of him as a small baby, confined in an incubation pod. Bit by bit, as the hours went by, reliving those memories, he came to understand that the people he saw outside his incubator were his parents, Bardock and Guinea. Now he remembered. He remembered when they gave him the name Kakarot as well, and he even recalled a moment when Raditz visited him. Raditz didn't seem at all like the horrible and cruel person he would become in the future. All those recollections ended with the last of them, Bardock placing him in a space pod, and together with his mother, they said goodbye to him, sending him to Earth. It was an extremely frightening and painful moment for him, but he could see through the glass while his pod ascended beyond the planet's atmosphere that his mother was crying, devastated at having to send her son away. It was confusing for him to remember this. Goku had thought that all Saiyans without any restriction were terrible monsters, thinking that he alone was the exception because of his head injury. But now he understood, seeing his mother's sweetness and affection, that not all Saiyans were cruel, and therefore Saiyans did not necessarily have to be cruel. It was after this realization that the Saiyan finally awoke from his coma to find himself on a strange, unique planet, carried by several small, bizarre creatures, the Yardrashians. From there, everything proceeded normally again according to the story, but now Goku had a completely different perspective about himself and his race. He'd remembered all the memories he lost when he was a baby. He remembered everything: his planet, his race, his name, his brother when he was a little kid, and most importantly, his parents. Raditz was wrong. He was never sent to Earth to destroy it and conquer it. He was only sent there by his parents so he would survive Planet Vegeta's destruction at Frieza's hands. As the months went by, while Goku learned instant transmission from Master Pibara, he also reflected on all these memories and new understanding of his race, everything he had discovered about his past, and having remembered just how much his parents loved him, as well as the fact that Raditz wasn't always the monster Goku knew as an adult. Goku gradually began to think, if evil among Saiyans wasn't intrinsic, it meant it was possible for them to be redeemed, for them to change if they were given the chance. Now he felt that maybe what happened to them at Frieza's hands had been an injustice. Little by little, the idea formed in his mind that perhaps someday he could bring them back to life and give them a second chance. Time continued passing, and eventually the moment came for Goku to return to Earth, especially when, to his utter astonishment, he sensed that Frieza was still alive and was now heading to Earth as well, most likely to take revenge, accompanied by another key very similar to his own. Hastening to board the repaired space capsule provided by the Yardrashians and thanking them for all their help, as well as thanking Master Pibara for everything he taught him, Goku considered using instant transmission if necessary to protect Earth. But upon sensing a powerful key very similar to his own utterly dwarfed Frieza's and his father's before destroying them completely, and since this key didn't emanate any evil or malice at heart, Goku decided to relax and enjoy the journey to Earth without teleporting, which would take him another 3 hours before arriving. When he finally landed on Earth, he was surprised and puzzled to see all his friends waiting for him, perfectly aware of where he was going to land, something not even he knew for sure, not exactly being an experienced pilot. He was quickly introduced to the young man who defeated Frieza and who, by all appearances, was also a Super Saiyan, and Goku went off to speak with him in private. That young man revealed to Goku that his name was Trunks and that he came from the future, explaining the entire reason behind his journey in time: the androids, the death of all the warriors at their hands, and Goku's heart disease preventing him from participating in those future battles. But what struck Goku the most from all that information was the name of Trunks' father, who was none other than Vegeta himself, and that, along with Bulma, they had Trunks, something that astonished Goku greatly. Although Trunks didn't see what that had to do with the androids, Goku asked more about how Vegeta was in the future before he died, and how much he had changed since the day he first arrived on Earth. Trunks answered as best he could, based on his mother's limited information about his father in the future. Goku was still surprised by the tremendous change Vegeta could undergo, since Goku knew very well that his best friend Bulma would never put up with someone like him if she hadn't seen something special in him, something beyond the brutality and bloodthirst he showed everyone when they first met. This further reinforced his earlier reflections that indeed Saiyans were not innately evil, and that they could change if given the right chance and context. Finally, he knew what to do with all that information, thinking it would be a great opportunity for the future and the android threat. Trunks departed after answering all of Goku's questions, wishing them luck in preparing for the androids and saying he'd try to come back in 3 years to help. From there, after Trunks' departure back to the future, Goku interacted with his friends, where with Piccolo's help, since Piccolo had overheard their conversation, they told everyone what was going to happen in the future and about the androids, of course. As in the original story, Bulma proposed simply using the Dragon Balls to locate Dr. Gero and his lab, destroying the androids before they were activated or maybe even created. But naturally, with the stubborn, prideful nature of the warriors, especially the Saiyans like Goku and Vegeta, they refused to use that solution. Instead, they decided to take advantage of this foreknowledge to train as hard as possible over the next 3 years. However, this is where one of the biggest changes to the original story occurred. While all the other human warriors left, Goku asked Vegeta and Bulma to stay a bit longer, as he needed both of their help and opinions. Goku explained everything he had been thinking for the last year and a half since the events on Namek. How he had regained his memories from before hitting his head, how he realized his parents were good people and very different from the rest of the Saiyans, and even Raditz wasn't so horrible when he was a child. In essence, after spelling out all those reflections and reasoning, Goku asked Bulma for the Dragon Radar so he could gather all the Dragon Balls and revive the Saiyans, which Bulma and Piccolo considered sheer madness, while Gohan and Vegeta weren't sure what to think. Goku told them that in the end, the Saiyans deserved a second chance. After all, that was exactly what Vegeta had lamented when he died at Frieza's hands on Namek. Vegeta, embarrassed to recall that vulnerable moment when he opened up to Kakarot, telling him all his grief and pain over losing everything because of Frieza, listened while Goku also asked Vegeta if, when he came to Earth with Nappa, he had been stronger at that point than any Saiyan alive on Planet Vegeta before its destruction. Vegeta confirmed that yes, he had already been the most powerful Saiyan in his race's known history ever since childhood, surpassing his own father, who had been the second strongest on Planet Vegeta. Therefore, Goku pointed out that even if everything went wrong, the revived Saiyans would be extremely weak in comparison, and any of them could easily defeat them if they tried to attack. In the end, everyone begrudgingly agreed to Goku's idea, and although Vegeta wouldn't admit it in front of everyone, he too was happy and excited to see his race revived. The process, however, wasn't instantaneous, because at that point, Shenron could only grant one wish per summoning, and then they had to wait a year to make another wish. They couldn't revive the Saiyans without first reconstructing Planet Vegeta, so Goku first gathered the Dragon Balls to ask Shenron to restore Planet Vegeta to the exact state it had been in before Frieza destroyed it. Afterward, he went to see Kami to ask if it was possible to remove the limitation so people who had died more than a year ago could still be revived. Kami affirmed that it was possible, though he was entirely against the idea of reviving the Saiyans. But at the same time, he said it would be hypocritical of him to pretend he didn't understand Goku. After all, he himself would have given anything centuries ago to know who he was and where he came from. If he and Piccolo had been able to rediscover their origins and have living Namekians to visit and learn from whenever they wanted, then Goku deserved the same with his race. Finally, Kami removed the limitation that allowed only those who had died within the last year to be revived. Thus, after another year of waiting, they gathered all the Dragon Balls again to finally revive the Saiyans. Obviously, in that span of time, everyone had already begun training for the android threat, and during that period, Goku told all his friends about his plan to revive his race. Naturally, it was very poorly received by everyone at first, though they eventually relented even if they didn't like the idea. Overall, at that point, the only ones who were excited about it were Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan. Goku and Vegeta each had their own reasons for feeling excited, while Gohan was simply thrilled at the prospect of meeting his grandparents, especially since his father assured him they weren't as bad as everyone might have imagined, based on the memories he recovered from before he arrived on Earth. Thus, with everyone gathered at Capsule Corporation, where they also learned of Bulma's pregnancy by Vegeta, they summoned Shenron. And so, Goku asked Shenron to revive all the Saiyans who died the day Frieza destroyed Planet Vegeta. Even the dragon, who was usually indifferent to the wishes people made, asked Goku nervously if he was sure he didn't want something else. But after a bit of insistence, the worried dragon finally agreed to grant the wish, then left nervously, thinking about how terrible it was to bring back warriors as bloodthirsty as the Saiyans once were. Everyone was confused, as they'd never seen Shenron so anxious. At last, Goku could sense the Saiyan's ki on Planet Vegeta, and he could teleport there with whoever wanted to accompany him. However, with the gravity 10 times that of Earth, it wasn't something most of the group were used to, so only the strongest could go on this first trip. Goku, Vegeta, Gohan, and Piccolo. The 4 of them clung to Goku so he could use instant transmission to travel to Planet Vegeta along with all the Saiyans. In just an instant, they found themselves in the middle of a village on Planet Vegeta, surrounded by Saiyans in a panic, not understanding what was happening to them. Many had gone completely insane during their time in Hell, unable to grasp how they were alive again. Gohan had a hard time standing upright due to the intense gravity, having never trained under increased gravity before. But thanks to his massive power, far above any Saiyan on Planet Vegeta, he quickly adapted and endured that gravity, though he was better off not trying to fight or move too much under those conditions until he could train for it. Vegeta took on the role of tour guide, giving them more context about Saiyan society, where they were, and how villages on the planet were distributed according to class. The place they had arrived in was a village for low-class Saiyans, while off in the distance they could see King Vegeta's castle. The fortress and its surroundings were where the high-class and elite Saiyans lived. Eventually, Vegeta left Goku and the others behind, heading off on his own to the castle of his father. Meanwhile, little by little, those Saiyans who regained their wits and began to process being alive again realized the strange people who had appeared in the middle of the village, especially obvious because among the man and the boy was a Namekian, which really caught everyone's attention. Suddenly, as Goku, Gohan, and Piccolo were about to leave, feeling uncomfortable with so many eyes on them, a woman off in the distance shouted the name Kakarot upon seeing them, and she leapt onto Gohan to grab him and hug him. It had only been a year since they started training, so Gohan's short hair, which had grown somewhat in that time, still wasn't as long as it would be at the end of those 3 years before the androids arrived. A sort of intermediate length, giving Gohan a hairstyle closer to his father's natural look. Gohan blushed and felt confused because this woman was hugging him so tightly and affectionately. Bardock quickly caught up to Gine, telling her to let go of the boy. Clearly this wasn't Kakarot. It was true he resembled him, and the adult looked even more similar, but that wasn't all that strange among low-class Saiyans to look alike. Besides, Kakarot was just a small baby, Bardock thought, though he wondered how his son was doing now that, for whatever reason, Frieza had vanished and the planet and their entire race had been brought back to life. Thanks to his memories, Goku immediately recognized who these people were. For the first time in ages, perhaps since Goku last saw his grandpa Gohan, he found himself at a loss for words, finding it difficult to speak and feeling emotional at seeing his parents again. But he steeled himself and explained everything. Goku stopped the Saiyan couple as they were about to walk away, telling them he knew that they had 2 sons, and that the younger son had been sent to Earth to survive Planet Vegeta's destruction at Frieza's hands. Bardock and Gine were shocked to hear that, not knowing how any other Saiyan could know about it when they hadn't told a soul. Finally, with a few tears he couldn't help shedding, Goku told him he knew all that because he was that son, telling them with a big smile that although a lot of time had passed, far more than they could imagine, he was Kakarot. Bardock and Gine were stunned by this revelation, taking a few seconds to accept it because it was so confusing to see him as an adult instead of a baby. But after those few seconds, they realized it was impossible for it to be a lie. Gine returned to them and clung to Kakarot, now a grown man, hugging him with all her strength. Bardock approached his son, not hugging him but placing his hand on his shoulder, telling him how happy he was to see him all grown up, yet also demanding how in the world this could be. That was how Goku began summarizing his entire life on Earth and everything that happened up to Frieza's defeat and that of his father, as well as the Dragon Balls, which could grant any wish. Goku's parents and the other low-class Saiyans listening nearby were stunned by such news and stories. Meanwhile, Vegeta had entered the Royal Saiyan Castle, completely ignored as just another elite guard no one recognized, while the rest of the high-class warriors listened to a very agitated King Vegeta give his next orders. He couldn't understand how on earth they had all returned to life, but if that was the case, they had to seize this second chance. Maybe Frieza and King Cold were dead, and so they could claim the place of those two and rule the universe as the proud Saiyans always should have. It was then that Vegeta interrupted his father arrogantly, telling him that while it was true Frieza and King Cold were dead, they had no interest in ruling the dying empire of those two, and there were more important things to handle than dominating other worlds. King Vegeta immediately strode up in front of this person who resembled him so much yet was shorter, questioning how he dared defy the king's orders. The king told his royal guards to imprison Vegeta, but Vegeta told him not to bother, that none of them could do anything to him at this point, because he was their son, Vegeta the Fourth. That declaration of identity stunned and confused everyone in the room, as they couldn't comprehend how this grown man could be Vegeta the Fourth. King Vegeta roared angrily at him, calling it a blatant lie, since his son was only a child at the moment. Vegeta cut off his father, stating exactly what the king was about to say, that yes, his son was currently 8 years old and away on a conquest mission on another planet with Nappa and Raditz. The king was shocked that this stranger knew all that, as Vegeta again asserted that he truly was his son and that yes, he had a lot to explain. But the king had better be prepared because it was a great deal to process. Despite everything, King Vegeta, arrogant and condescending toward this supposed older son, still refused to believe it, assuming it had to be some trick or form of magic. Vegeta finally lost his patience with his father's idiocy. Vegeta exploded with rage and frustration, shouting that he had lost everything: his throne, his position, his future, his race, his planet, his father. And now that they've been resurrected, this was how his father repaid him for bringing them back? Simply put, it made him feel utterly disgusted, and he immediately recalled how he had hated his father as a child and how indifferent he'd been to the destruction of his planet and race when it happened. That frustration subconsciously contained sadness, feelings he would have considered weak for being sad that his father didn't recognize him. Obviously, that wasn't something he was about to admit at this point in the story, as Vegeta wasn't yet as mature and composed as he would be in the future. Because of all that anger, he finally transformed into a Super Saiyan right there in the middle of the castle hall, terrifying all the Saiyans present, including the king himself. Vegeta was surprised at him that at last he had also achieved the legend, and realizing what had happened, he smiled proudly and cynically at his father, asking if he still had doubts that he was indeed his son. Right at that moment, Goku, Gohan, and Piccolo sensed Vegeta's tremendous ki spike abruptly, with Goku wondering if he'd finally done it. Indeed, moments later, part of the castle had been destroyed by Vegeta himself, sending a confused, terrified, and disoriented King Vegeta flying several kilometers away. Everyone was now utterly terrified and intimidated by the power of the Super Saiyan. Bardock and Gine were petrified with fear, wondering if that man in the sky was Prince Vegeta. Goku confirmed it, as well as confirming that he was a Super Saiyan, an assertion that astonished all who heard it in the village. But there was yet another surprise in store. Goku, filled with confidence and pride at being able to show his parents, told them that Vegeta wasn't the only one with that form, and in fact, Goku was the first to attain it, and thanks to that power, he had defeated Frieza. He then transformed before everyone, his parents, the Saiyan villagers, and the elite Saiyans who had gathered, having detected the power levels on their scouters before those scouters exploded, bursting forth in a brutal golden aura that made the entire area quake, thus showing them all that he too, Kakarot, a low-class Saiyan, had reached the Super Saiyan form, providing an interesting and inspiring contrast between Vegeta staying aloft in the sky in that form, and Goku on the ground among the low-class Saiyans in that same form, demonstrating that any Saiyan, whether low-class or high-class, could attain that transformation. Bardock was speechless. He never imagined his son could go so far when he'd been born with such a small power level. All his hopes and expectations had been met, and then some. His son was a Super Saiyan. King Vegeta, barely able to stand after being blown to that location by his son's explosion of power, could only look on in terror, pride, and envy at his son's achievement, while also feeling horrified and disgusted that a low-class Saiyan had also attained that form. Goku and Vegeta stared intensely at each other, the two immediately understanding what they wanted to do. They wanted to fight. Vegeta especially wanted to test his new Super Saiyan form and see what he was capable of now that he had attained it. Goku rose into the sky, positioning himself beside Vegeta, and shouted to the Saiyans below to watch the battle they were about to wage, for they might learn much from this power if they too wished to attain it. The two rival Saiyans assumed the same fighting stances they had used on the day they first met, thus beginning the first true battle between two Super Saiyans in history. After the entire Saiyan race had been brought back to life, and all those inhabitants had been updated on everything that had happened since they died, along with the reason for their resurrection, the extremely difficult task would begin: changing the evil mentality of most of the Saiyans while also training them to become stronger, using them as training partners for the warriors' own preparations for the arrival of the androids in less than 2 years by that point. Goku and Vegeta would mainly focus on training together now that the prince had achieved Super Saiyan and could be a worthy rival for Goku's power. Meanwhile, Gohan and Piccolo would be in charge of training the rest of the Saiyans so that they could increase their base power, as well as develop skills and aspects in which they did not excel. For example, learning to control their power levels at will and to sense ki without needing a scouter. Although Gohan felt extremely intimidated by so many violent, aggressive, and ferocious warriors, it was, in reality, only a psychological impression. Despite his young age and the fact that he was far from reaching his father's or Vegeta's level, ironically, he was already stronger than any Saiyan from Planet Vegeta by a massive margin. Therefore, he was never in any real danger from these warriors, even if they tried to kill him for real. In any case, that was never going to happen because he was defended by Piccolo and also had moral support from Bardock and Guinea, his grandparents, with whom he began to form a very close bond, especially with his grandmother Guinea. Of course, sometimes the warriors would take breaks from their intense training on Planet Vegeta and return to Earth, even bringing Goku's parents to Earth so they could see his home and meet his wife. Chi-Chi felt deeply intimidated but also honored to finally meet her husband's parents, although with her personality, she got along terribly with Bardock and much better with Guinea, even teaching Guinea how to cook Earth dishes. During those visits, the other human fighters met Goku's parents as well as Bardock's squad, who, having died on the same day Planet Vegeta was destroyed, had also been revived. The humans were relieved to see that although these Saiyans were rather serious and unfriendly, at least they were not savage monsters like they'd imagined. Even King Vegeta visited Earth, with his son introducing him to his, technically, wife, Bulma, though they had never formally married, and also presenting him to their newborn son, Trunks. Since King Vegeta had not yet completely changed his personality, he found it rather pathetic and disgusting that his son had stooped to procreating with another species, especially with such a stubborn and insufferable woman as Bulma, in his opinion. As expected, he got along very poorly with her. Still, this was quite normal given the society he came from, in which he was born and raised. It was not as though Vegeta himself was much of a sweetheart to Bulma either, but over time, things would improve. As time passed, training with dozens and dozens of warriors at once proved extremely beneficial to everyone's power growth. In Dragon Ball, even basic training can be more effective than any advanced training if done with training partners, and even more so with Saiyans. Because of this, over time, some Saiyans managed to achieve Super Saiyan. Bardock, of course, but also King Vegeta, Bardock's squad, and a few other Saiyans. Nevertheless, they were still vastly weaker than Goku and Vegeta, who were growing extremely powerful by training so intensely with one another, something that had not happened at that point in the original story, significantly boosting their power. King Vegeta grew disgusted upon realizing that maybe his son and his rival Kakarot were right, and that social classes among Saiyans did not matter. Those who gained Super Saiyan had almost nothing in common in terms of elite or low-class status. Both lower and upper-class Saiyans could attain the form. Seeing that it was neither so special nor truly legendary, nor even exclusive to his royal bloodline, King Vegeta fell into a deep existential crisis regarding his role as King of the Saiyans, wondering what made him legitimate as king if neither he nor his dynasty had anything special in their genes. Furthermore, not even counting Goku and Vegeta, warriors like Bardock were slightly above him as well, frustrating him immensely as he lost confidence in himself, almost regretting and resenting his son for bringing everyone back to life, only to humiliate him this way. Eventually, Goku and Vegeta also informed their families about the threat of the androids in the future and how Goku would die from a heart virus, worrying Bardock and Guinea greatly. They kept a close watch to ensure that Kakarot took his heart medicine as soon as he felt the first symptoms of the disease. Over time, some Saiyans became strong enough to serve as decent training partners for Goku and Vegeta, which also forced Piccolo to push himself harder, and Gohan managed to achieve Super Saiyan much earlier than in the original story. With so many Super Saiyans training together, it was inevitable that someone would eventually come up with the idea of maintaining Super Saiyan constantly in order to better control the form, quickly discovering the so-called full power, or grade 4 state. This gave a huge advantage to several warriors, pushing their powers even further. Because of that, Goku and Vegeta were immeasurably stronger than they were in the original story at that point. Even though everything was going well and it was great for Goku to have a relationship with his parents, a taboo subject still remained among them. One that always made family gatherings awkward. The subject of Raditz. Obviously, by this time, Goku had explained to them everything that happened with Raditz and how he died due to his own actions, but despite understanding why Goku had to do what he did back then, Bardock and Gine now wanted him to give Raditz the same second chance he had given them and their entire race. Eventually, Goku agreed, deciding to revive Raditz as soon as Earth's Dragon Balls became active again, resulting in a very tense and uncomfortable situation for everyone, especially for Gohan, who still carried the trauma of having been kidnapped as a child by his uncle. Although Raditz's first thought upon being revived was to kill absolutely everyone, especially his brother and Piccolo, the presence of Bardock and Gine managed to calm the impulsive Saiyan. Even so, it would take him a long time to forgive Kakarot for killing him, though that was basically his own fault. Again, he would take a long time to admit it. Time continued to pass, finishing up the final year before the androids' arrival. Goku and Vegeta asked some Saiyans if they wanted to come to Earth to help fight the androids. Naturally, Bardock and his squad jumped at the chance, eager to test their powers as Super Saiyans. King Vegeta also decided to go fight with them, hoping for a chance to unleash his fury on those so-called androids, while Gine traveled along as moral support for Chi-Chi and the others who were not fighters, since she was not a warrior and had never resumed training. Combat was simply not something she enjoyed. Raditz, however, preferred to avoid the situation by staying on Planet Vegeta alone. And besides, he was too far behind in terms of power to be of any help in the upcoming battle anyway. Because Goku's parents were more involved in his life, he actually took his heart medicine, so there were no more problems on that front. When the fateful date and location arrived where the androids would appear, everyone went there to fight, waiting patiently for these enemies to show up. While they waited, Yajirobe bought senzu beans for everyone, and as he was about to leave the area, he was the first victim of one of the androids' attacks. The enemy launched an energy blast that destroyed his flying vehicle, but fortunately he survived by falling into the ocean. Gohan was sent to rescue Yajirobe, while the rest of the group spread out through the city to locate the androids since they had no detectable key. Unlike the original story, where the group was smaller, this time it was much larger, so by the time Yamcha had the bad luck of running into androids 20 and 19, he was saved at the last second by Fasha before Dr. Gero could absorb his energy and impale him through the chest. Yamcha and Fasha immediately flared their ki so the others could find them, and everyone quickly arrived on the scene to confront the androids. Android 20 then began to ruthlessly destroy several occupied buildings with I-beams, only to be stopped by Goku's furious blow. Goku then negotiated with Gero to go fight somewhere without civilians, and Gero, unfazed, accepted. Thus, everyone followed the androids to a deserted area for the battle. Although the androids' cold robotic demeanor was unsettling, the fighters were not too worried. The only question was who would fight first. Naturally, Goku wanted to fight. He was in perfect condition, having taken his medicine on time, but Vegeta stepped in, wanting to show everyone his superiority as well. It was at that moment, however, that King Vegeta asserted his authority over his son, insisting that he be the one to fight Android 19, and the others ultimately accepted. By this point in the story, King Vegeta, along with Bardock, had a power level comparable to Goku and Vegeta from the original timeline at the start of that saga, whereas the Goku and Vegeta of this alternate timeline already had full power Super Saiyan, grade 4, and were about as strong as Goku was during the Cell games in the original series. Ironically, letting King Vegeta fight the android was better for having an interesting battle, since otherwise Goku and Vegeta would have wiped out either of the two androids. It also gave everyone the chance to see just how much father and son resembled each other. King Vegeta fought with the same brutality and satisfaction in causing damage that his son did, ultimately finishing off Android 19 in much the same way Vegeta did in the original storyline. Astounded by King Vegeta's display of enormous power and realizing only then that he was clearly outmatched, Dr. Gero tried to flee, but a vigilant Bardock blocked his attempt and prevented his escape, setting him up for the vicious beating he was about to receive. Bardock fought the other android, tearing him to pieces the same way King Vegeta had done with 19, finishing Dr. Gero off before he could get back to his lab to awaken the other androids. It was right at the moment Bardock finished off Dr. Gero that future Trunks arrived at the battlefield, completely confused by the sheer absurdity of the situation. From his perspective, nothing made sense. He was seeing 2 Gokus and 2 Vegetas, and 2 androids in pieces that looked nothing like those from his future. Terrified, he realized that the timeline had changed far more than he ever expected. Goku and the others tried to calm Trunks down, who was nervous about so many new faces, and Goku explained everything that had happened over the past 3 years since they last met, how he decided to revive the entire Saiyan race,